Let's imagine that we have a coin. One side is heads and the other side is tails. We want to flip this coin 100 times and record the outcome of each flip. In this case, our outcome can either be heads or tails. However, instead of denoting these outcomes as words, in statistics, we like to assign numbers to these outcomes. This is so we can do calculations on these outcomes. We can write down the number 1 when we see heads and the number 0 when we see tails. This brings us to what a random variable is. A random variable consists of a set of numerical values which represent the possible outcomes of a random experiment. In our example, we can call our random variable x, and we can use this to represent the outcomes of the coin flips. The values of x can either be 1 or 0, which represents heads or tails. There are two types of random variables: discrete and continuous. Discrete random variable just means that you can count the values of the random variable. So a 0 for tails and a 1 for heads. We can easily count these numbers. The other class of random variables is called continuous random variables, where it's impossible for us to count all of the values. For example, the numbers can exist between 0 and 1, such as 0.11, 0.13, 0.111, etc. There's an infinite amount of numbers to count if we think about all of these decimal values. Think of a continuous random variable as height. Height can be 5.3 feet or 5.1 feet, meaning that it's impossible for us to count all of the values of a person's height. Now let's go back to our coin flip example. Let's just say we flipped this coin 100 times and we saw that 46 of those flips were heads and 54 of the flips were tails. This suggests that there is a 46% probability of the flip being heads, which means there is a 54% of it being tails. Let's visualize this in a chart. This chart tells us the probability of the coin being heads or tails. We call this a probability distribution. A probability distribution tells us the possible outcomes of an experiment and the probability that we observe them. There are two broad categories of probability distribution: discrete and continuous. It's obvious that discrete random variables will produce discrete probability distribution, and continuous random variable will produce continuous probability distribution. As mentioned previously, height is a continuous random variable. We can also summarize the values of this random variable into a continuous probability distribution. As shown here, the x-axis tells us the possible outcomes of height, and the y-axis tells us an approximation of the probability of observing those height outcomes. Let's recap what we just learned. We talked about a random variable defined as a variable that consists of a set of numerical values which represent the possible outcomes of a random experiment. There are two types of random variables: discrete and continuous. We also learned that we can summarize these random variables using probability distributions, where we have the outcomes as well as the probability that we would observe those outcomes. That concludes our video. Stay tuned for the next episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe.